I want to begin by acknowledging, with respect, the ancestral and traditional Aboriginal territories of Treaty 6 and 7 nations on whose land we are celebrating today. Dear graduates, President of RDC, honored guests, distinguished faculty, family, and friends. I want to begin with the graduates. Today is your day. Your accomplishments are reason for joyous celebrations with those near and far who have supported you, nurtured you, and believed in you, even when you doubted or didn't believe in yourself. You can be proud of your accomplishments. They are a testament to you, your family, and your community. I'm very honored to be here with you today, but I'm especially excited and delighted for a number of other reasons as well. First, it's extremely special to receive an honorary degree from the institution where I began my postgraduate education more than 35 years ago. I'm also very, very happy that members of my family are here today, as I'm sure they often wonder, what is she up to? What is she doing? They are to be acknowledged for agreeing to come and share in this event of their own free will. I'm thrilled to have been nominated for this degree by my wonderful colleagues in the Red Deer College Department of Nursing, the same department where I received a diploma in nursing. Red Deer College was a place where I was thoroughly introduced into the fundamentals of nursing and professional practice, where the seeds for pursuing my passion in public health and social justice were planted. A place where, as a nursing instructor, I encourage students to follow their passions while being reminded to follow my own. Thank you, Red Deer College. And thank you for the kind and generous citation. I want to take these few minutes to speak with you honestly and openly about some pressing public health issues. As Stephen Lewis says, I'm going to make unvarnished remarks about affect all of us deeply. Issues that I believe are the reason I have the privilege of being here today. The World Health Organization in 2008, in their landmark report, Closing a Gap in a Generation, said, social injustice is killing people on a grand scale. This report identified that poor health within and between countries is a consequence of the unequal distribution of power, income, goods and services globally and nationally. They state, this unequal distribution of health-damaging experiences is not in any sense a natural phenomena, but is a result of a toxic combination of poor social policies and programs, unfair economic arrangements, and bad politics. Together, such policies and practices create unfair and inequitable conditions in society that produce poor health outcomes through poverty, racism, gender and sexual discrimination, and ableism. I want to touch on 3 issues. In Canada, more than 235,000 people will have nowhere to sleep tonight or on any given night this year, with severe consequences for health and well-being. Homelessness is a public health emergency in our country. The current state of homelessness is a result of the withdrawal of investments into social and affordable housing, privatization of the housing market over the past 25 years. It's the result of welfare policy changes that have left people with insufficient and inadequate income. Decisions that fail to recognize that governments have a role to play in ensuring a social safety net and that charity is not an adequate or sustainable response. Last year, I acted as an expert legal witness for the residents of Superintendent City in Victoria, who fought against displacement from the provincial courthouse lawn. They won the right to stay in Tent City until adequate and appropriate housing was available to them in the community. A similar decision was made in the courts recently in Vancouver. On the courthouse lawn, living in tents without basic amenities, such as running water, they found community and safety, and through their actions, catalyzed investments in housing. These acts of community resistance are bringing into sharp relief what has been well established through multiple reports and research. that housing is unaffordable and out of reach for many as a result of multiple systemic barriers. Homelessness has particularly impacted Canada's Indigenous people. Colonization displaced and dispossessed Aboriginal people of their lands and resources, created reserves and residential school, stripping self-determination, language, ceremony, and identity. The reverberations of these structurally violent policies continue to this day, impacting not only homelessness, but economic employment opportunities, health and well-being of Aboriginal peoples in Canada. In British Columbia, we have been impacted and are at the epicenter of an overdose emergency. In 2016, 931 people died of an overdose in BC. That's more deaths in one province than in all of Canada during the widely publicized SARS outbreak. In Alberta, the number of overdose deaths has already increased 60% this year over last. Overdose deaths are killing more people in a year than AIDS did in each year in the first 30 years of the crisis. This is a national public health emergency, whether governments recognize it or not. The loss and grief in our communities is palpable. Drug policy and prohibition is killing people on a grand scale. Look to the Philippines and the extrajudicial killing of thousands of people suspected of drug use. Prohibitionist policies are based on ideological views about race and morality, not science and evidence. The war on drugs has resulted in mass death, criminalization, high levels of stigma and discrimination, dramatically impacting health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities. We are not dealing with moral failings or a disease of addiction. We are dealing with systemic failures that have demonized and criminalized substance use. The harms of substance use, including overdose, stigma, addiction, and HIV, are driven by failed drug policy, which incarcerates people rather than treating substance use as a public health issue. Collective action is needed to call on governments to immediately decriminalize currently illegal drugs, adequately regulate substances, and rapidly scale up harm reduction and treatment service. We cannot blame people for failed policies, but we can be part of social movements to change those policies. Maya Angelou, an American poet and civil rights activist, said, "Develop enough courage so that you can stand up for yourself and then stand up for someone else." Allyship is a process of building relationships and trust with others. To be an ally means to be recognized as such by those with whom we seek to ally. It is not something we choose, but something we earned. I started with an acknowledgement of the traditional territories of the Treaty 6 and 7 nations. Since 2000, I've been living and working on the unceded territories of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanic peoples. As a third-generation settler of German ancestry, I've had opportunities and privileges open to me as a result of my position in society. As such, I'm implicated in the colonial history of Canada and actions of many Canadian settlers that resulted in displacement and dispossession of Canada's Indigenous peoples. The UN has repeatedly pointed out that as a nation, we have been failing Indigenous people. There are 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for all of us, including specific calls for child welfare, health, education, and educational institutional reforms. We must act in a good way, recognizing the historical and ongoing effects of colonization. Public health as social justice means having the courage to question policies and act in ways that mitigate and do not perpetuate injustices. I often ask my two children, what will you do to fight for health, social, economic, or environmental justice? Today I ask you that question. People often tell new graduates, you are the future, but you have a history that has informed who you are and that will guide you and has already guided you in answering that question. I'm grateful to Red Deer College for conferring this honor on me. It's the first time I've received an honorary degree, and I don't particularly anticipate receiving any more. To me, it's less about recognition of anything I may have done and more about the value that this institution places upon evidence-based public health, advocacy, and the pursuit of social justice. The world is literally shifting on its axes, and it is through our collective social actions that we will make changes together that will move us towards a fairer and more just society. Thank you.